War is hell, but some wars, they go beyond that. They become nightmares, endless, waking nightmares where the living envy the dead. World War I was one such war, a war where the sky rained fire, the earth swallowed men whole, and death wasn't the worst thing you could find in the trenches. This is the dark and terrifying story of World War I. It all began in 1914 with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. What followed was a chain reaction, dragging Europe into a war unlike any before. But no one, not even the most battle-hardened generals, could have predicted the horrors that awaited them. When the war started, soldiers thought it would be glorious. They imagined quick battles, heroic charges, and medals of honor. But as they marched to the front lines, they smelled the air thick with decay, saw the broken bodies of those who came before them, and heard the distant screams carried by the wind. Reality hit like a bullet to the skull. Trench warfare was hell on earth. Narrow, muddy, rat-infested tunnels stretched for miles, lined with men who barely looked human anymore. Some soldiers said the trenches were alive, not with soldiers, but with things that should not exist. The mud swallowed men whole. They would scream for hours, their bodies sinking deeper and deeper until their mouths filled with sludge, and they were never seen again. The rats grew unnaturally large, feasting on corpses, and sometimes on soldiers too weak to fight back. The dead never left. Their bodies lined the trenches, their glassy eyes still open as if watching, waiting. Soldiers whispered of things moving in the darkness, shadows with no men to cast them, whispering voices calling them by name. Some men claimed they saw their dead comrades crawling back from no man's land, reaching out with twisted fingers. At night, the trenches felt cursed. Many swore they could hear laughter, but not from the living. Between the trenches lay no man's land, a wasteland of shattered bodies and broken souls. It was said that those who entered without permission from the dead would never return whole. Many patrols went in, but sometimes only one or two came back, and the ones who did, they weren't the same. They spoke of shadows moving unnaturally, of whispers inside their helmets, telling them to stay forever. One French soldier, Pierre Duval, was sent into no man's land with his unit. Only he returned. He was found days later, shaking violently, his skin pale as death. When they asked him what happened, he only muttered, "They smiled at me. The dead, they smiled and followed me back." That night, Pierre put a bullet in his own head. Then came the gas, mustard gas, chlorine, phosgene, invisible killers that didn't just destroy the body, but shattered the mind. The gas crept in like a ghost, filling the trenches with a burning mist. Men clawed at their faces, their lungs melting from the inside. Some ran, but there was no escape. Worse still, some soldiers claimed that the gas had a voice. They swore that in the thick of the poison they heard whispers, mocking, cruel, inviting them to breathe deep. Some who survived the gas didn't really survive. Their minds were broken. Their eyes stayed wide, as if they had seen something in the fog that no man was meant to see. One British officer, Lieutenant James Carver, was found after a gas attack, laughing hysterically. His mask had been ripped off, but he was still alive. When asked how he survived, he simply said, "The voices told me to stop breathing, so I did." He died that night, not from gas, but from something that left no mark on his body. As the war dragged on, men stopped fearing death and started fearing what came after. Some soldiers refused to sleep near the mass graves. They said they could hear scratching sounds from underneath. Others claimed to have seen headless soldiers still marching, weapons in hand, as if the war would never let them go. At the Battle of Passchendaele, one of the bloodiest battles of the war, over 300,000 men perished in the mud. But in the dead of night, strange figures were seen walking through the battlefield. British and German soldiers alike reported silent figures in tattered uniforms, moving in the fog, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. Some thought it was just hallucinations from stress. But how could so many men see the same thing? One German officer even wrote in his journal, "We killed them, but they won't leave. The dead are still fighting, and they are winning." On November 11th, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. The war was over. The world had changed forever. But for those who fought, it never truly ended. Many veterans returned home, but they were never the same. They refused to speak of what they saw. Others claimed that when they closed their eyes, they could still hear the screams, still see the figures moving in the trenches. One soldier, Corporal Thomas Wright, was found wandering the streets years after the war, murmuring, "They're still there, waiting." When asked who, he simply said, "The ones who never left." And so, the war ended. But something remained in those battlefields, in those cursed trenches. Something older than war, older than death itself. Because some wars never truly end, and some ghosts never stop fighting. This was the dark and terrifying story of World War I, a war that took more than just lives. If you enjoyed this tale of history's darkest moments, be sure to subscribe for more stories from the shadows of the past. And remember, history never forgets, neither do the dead.